an original.
From Story Studio Network.
Once around the park, James, and don't spare the horses.
Well, hello there. Welcome in. It is the 5th day of May, 2023. People always saying, why are you putting the date on these shows? Well, because, just for context, I know sometimes you don't listen until maybe a week later. It surprises me still that when we publish a show, and then I go back and I look and, put something else in there and we look at some of the stats, there are shows that are still being listened to regularly. A lot of downloads from like 6 months ago. So thanks for doing that. It's On the Ledge, your Ontario Politics podcast. Dave Trafford here from Story Studio Network and Keith Leslie from CH Television. You see and hear him from time to time out of the Hamilton facility, but now given the beauty of the internet, man, you could be seen anywhere.
That's great, isn't it?
Yeah.
I can do my work from anywhere. It really is. That's if there's any upside to that bloody pandemic, it was the fact that it not only enabled a great many people to work from home and consider doing that on a more permanent basis or semi-permanent basis, but it also enabled so many of us to realize the technology would allow us to work from anywhere at any time, which is great, except for when you really do want to take 2 weeks off. Well, no, you can still link up and we'll dial you in and you'll be good there. Use your phone app. No.
Damn.
Overall, it's fantastic. And as you say, people, they dial it, they get interesting. They listen to one. Well, am I going to listen to a couple more? Even though, again, having the data on them gives them the context for it. They're talking about this before Ford announced whatever, right? So it helps give the context for it. So I think it's very important to give the data off the top. But I'm the same. I start falling down a bit of a rabbit hole, and I'll find a podcast. I'm like, well, I'm going to go back and see what these guys were saying.
Mm-hmm.
And why not? That's, again, the beauty of the podcast. It's like, being able to tape record your favorite radio shows and dial them in when you want.
The interesting part of all of this, though, and not to get too far down the road on the podcast part of it, but the more work Aaron and I do on this, and we follow Jeff Vidler here in Toronto at Signal Hill Insights. I don't know if you ever crossed paths with Jeff in your radio days at BN, but he was a PD at CHOM FM in Montreal. He's been doing consulting longer than he was actually in radio, but a brilliant guy, all about the numbers. And people will tell you, well, what exactly do you sell when you've got the podcast? Do you sell downloads and so on? And you're getting more and more to the point where that you've just described, it's behavior of the listener, right? How often does it happen? Take a Netflix example. You find the show you like, oh my God, I'm sticking with this. You binge it, right?
Mm-hmm.
You didn't do that on network television. You're not turning CTV on and saying, oh, because you like that one show. It doesn't mean you're necessarily going to like the next show, right? So there's a different behavior involved there. And I heard one guy talk about the real value is that level of engagement, because if you can get somebody to listen through your show about 80% of the show, you're doing extraordinarily well.
Oh,
right?
Absolutely.
And, normally we act for 20, 30, 40 minutes, depending on how many people are around the table. The engagement levels on this show are in the 80s and have been consistently. So that's what you're kind of measuring. It's a different behavior than it is for, tuning in radio or television. Right?
It's you incorporate it into your lifestyle in a different way. And if something hits you as, hey, I want to get into this, often, again, it can be shared. What's that? You don't just listen to podcasts on your own. You start engaging, and then you talk about them afterwards. It's so much more engaging, I find. Certainly a lot better than the talking heads on television, especially now when you look and CNN and MSNBC, there'd be like 7, 8 people sitting around the table. What on earth is the point? And how do you follow it? Whereas this, you can engage, you can, if the topic really interests you, you can dig in deeper, you can go and find other podcasts on the same topic. It's fascinating, and it's just the new way we're going to be doing things. And it's the more opportunities we have to engage with people, the better. And of course, now you can engage with people, as you said, anywhere at any time.
So we're looking forward to the Canadian Music Week coming up in June here in Toronto. They're adding Radio Days North America to the offering. And Ross Davies used to be a programming VP at Standard and at Astral when I was there. And of course, he was made his mark as the programming genius at Chum and Chum FM in the day. He is promoting, he's on that side of the Radio Days part of it. And a lot of what they're going to talk about is podcasting and content on demand. And the radio guys are really slow to get around to this. I think, quite frankly, Keith, I think it's passed them by.
Well, if you're just coming in now, yes. I mean, this to me, I always, as a radio guy at the beginning of my career and at my core, the minute podcast came along, I said, well, this is just magazine format radio, but you can pick and choose at any time, which is just the ideal solution to the lost audiences. CBC used to produce some of the best radio programming in the country, but if you didn't listen to it at that specific hour, and maybe again at the repeat hour in the evening, they would give you 2 opportunities usually, but it wasn't like it is now. You do not have to miss anything. You can dial in, and that alone, for the continuity of a story, these podcasts about the True Crime podcasts are fascinating, and they dig you right into the story and take you all the way along. So I think it's a great addition to the medium, and I think it's sad that radio was so slow to pick up on just, again, I think CBC was fairly quick to start making podcasts out of some of its radio casts.
Entirely.
Very quickly.
And they've got quite a department that's going on there, and it's very productive, and they do some great shows. Don't get me started on how much it costs for an episode of a narrative podcast. Did I tell you this story?
Mm-mm.
We were at a conference. And so a narrative podcast is more like a documentary style where we'd go and do interviews, we'd have sound, we'd design, that sort of really painting the picture. But it's not a standalone show. It'd be a series. Yeah. But many of these are narrative, so it's some scripting, some interviewing, all of that kind of. There's significant production involved. So they did the team from CBC did a session at PodCamp in Toronto, and it's a fairly popular conference, and it's well attended, and certainly this year, because it was the first time back in person, really well attended at Toronto Metro University. There, I got that. Yeah. For those of you who missed in the show notes, he rolled his eyes. Yes. So they get the team up there, and they're talking about all these great things they're doing, and you'll laugh because they had a guy who was specifically about the recordings. And he was advised, they were talking to this room full of people, mostly who were doing this stuff off the side of their desk. Okay? I mean, really. And the guy gets up and he starts talking about the best way to record in the field. So what you really do want to make sure of is that you've got this equipment, and you've got this mic, and you've got this kind of boom, and you've got, all the technical stuff that you and I would tell somebody to use. But to make it the best show possible, you need somebody who is able to hold the microphone. Right? And I thought, oh, sweet, merciful baby Jesus. And it took me back to the days when we used to do scrums at Queen's Park, and CBC would have 15 crews there because they had to have one for French and for the national and for the local. And oh, my God. And for the radio.
They were certainly the last ones that you would still see the guy with the boom mic standing at the back of the scrum. Not the camera guy. The TV. A lot of people still have a camera person shooting the TV person, or they're shooting the subject, but a sound guy. I mean, movie sets are the last place you really are going to see a sound guy, other than some national TV productions, in which they'll have like a 3-camera shoot for an interview. For a certain news program, Fifth State, W5, those sorts of things. So that's a whole different level but for day-to-day news, and this is what we would see, as you say, day-to-day news, the scrums would be, well, we had a different word for them. Once they got to a big size, they had a very profound description for the profane, excuse me, because they were just clusters. Yeah. And you couldn't move. You were trapped in because there would be guys on step ladders at the back holding the camera, while the guy with the boom mic was even further back. So there were these concentric rings of people around some poor newsmaker in the middle of it all, whether it be a premier or an MPP or a prime minister. But the technology involved, it was just massive amounts of equipment hanging around you. Yeah. With crews being paid, as you said, this is not going to translate to podcasting. That's not how it's going to work. Well, it does for a certain
Here
network.
It does. So I bring it back to the conversation, and they finish their presentation, and I'm listening to all of this, right? Knowing, and I have produced narrative podcasts, Hello. I put my hand up. Oh, yeah. So how much would it cost to produce one episode of a narrative podcast without missing a beat? She says $35,000.
Oh, jeez.
I got news for you. We do some really good work and we have some great clients, but we don't charge $35,000 an episode.
Well, let me tell you, to put it into radio perspective, could be why radio's slow to pick up. That's a year's salary.
Absolutely.
For a starting reporter, maybe not in Toronto, but pretty well anywhere else.
Yep.
$35K is going to be about a top you're earning coming out of school.
Exactly.
So an episode.
No,
and yeah, that reporter who's making $35K would be assigned like a 30-minute documentary to produce in their spare time for the, a couple weeks down the road or whatever. So there's no $35K.
$35K. So.
Yeah. Well, at least they knew their rates.
Well, right away. And unabashed, not concerned at all about, sharing the secret sauce. So anyway, I realize we're all over the place here, but by the way, on the whole future of work thing that we started with, I do the Thursday feed drop on Now and Next, and we're featuring the first show that we produced in Story Studio Network, and it was The Next Normal. And this week, it just so happens to be dealing with the future of work. So if you haven't had a chance, flip over to Now and Next. And Lisa Taylor leads the conversation there from Challenge Factory. And it's interesting. It was recorded and produced July of 2021. And the whole point of the discussion was, what have we learned from COVID and what are the opportunities? So comb through it and let's just, have your own tick box, the scorecard to see where we are on building back better. And how many times, Keith, have we heard that phrase from the politicians? We're going to build back better. We're going to build back better. We're not building back better.
Well, we're certainly not looking back either. So please, let's talk about building forward, okay? We're looking ahead here. We don't want to look back at how badly we did during COVID. Interestingly, the Premier and the Health Minister had a news conference Thursday in Kitchener, and the local questions were all on healthcare and the hospitals, crunch and the shortage of doctors and all this. But one question that came actually from a member of the Queen's from the Canadian Press was about the government's lack of a long COVID plan. Now, there's actually, we should know, this is called post-COVID condition, or PCC. Get used to it, because it's here, and this is what they refer to it as. The Canadian Press obtained some Ministry of Health documents that basically said there is no coordinated approach to caring for people with long COVID. None at this point. So the Health Minister was asked this Thursday, and she danced quite a bit, but she did say that, this is Sylvia Jones, she did say there's actually now an OHIP billing code for long COVID. Well,
that's progress.
That's that, and then she just went on about how exciting a time it is to be hiring new doctors. It was just going off, but there was that little nugget there, and I thought, wow. So it's in the works apparently. They're still coordinating. They're still. She said they're still touching bases and coordinating everyone. There is no coordinated approach to caring for people with long COVID this far in. The fact we're actually even mentioning COVID seems a throwback. We've gone months now without actually talking about it on this podcast because we haven't needed to. Mm-hmm. And here we are, the government, surely to God, all the warnings we've had and the anecdotes and the experience we've had in the last 2.5 years, and we don't have a plan for long-term COVID yet. This just, as you say, if I go back and hear that 2021 podcast and see if indeed, we'll take care of the long-term COVID patients is in there on their checkbox. Mm-hmm. There was pledges of this, and we're just now sort of still working on this. It's shocking. It shouldn't be, but it is shocking that they've been this inept to still not have a plan for this, because let's face it, we're talking something like 20 to 25% of people who had COVID are having this lingering long COVID or post-COVID condition, PCC.
So the thing that worries me most about this file is that Minister Jones is the best person for the job.
Oh,
right?
man.
I mean, seriously.
It was, first of all, it's very, very rare for a news conference with the Premier to have one of the ministers, even the health minister, be given almost all the questions. Mm-hmm. And it got to the point at the end of the news conference where Ford himself started fielding the shortage of doctor questions, because all the questions were going to his health minister. And in each one, she would just throw out a little nugget of nothingness and then just dance around. It was the most, and again, saying how exciting a time it is we're getting new nurses into the province by trying to recruit them from everywhere else. By the way, you want to know how to recruit new nurses? Ask Nova Scotia. $10,000 a nurse if you sign a 2-year contract. They got 140 like that.
Yep.
That's how you do it. Oh, and we'll prorate it. If you want a half-time job, we'll give you $5,000. Sign up for a 2-year deal. So that's how you do it. You put your money where your mouth is. You show them that you want to treat them with respect, and you get them in. This will poach you. You can come here anytime and work as quickly as you want. Well, that's nice, but it's not addressing the situation, including the 1% wage freeze that you put on them. So this minister is just, she's even though she's there, she's missing in action.
Well, yeah, exactly. What is she doing exactly? Seriously. Anyway, but I think the other question that popped up that you had mentioned kind of caught your ear was around the University of Waterloo and their contracts with Huawei.
Yeah, this was a really interesting one. And again, the value of local reporters asking local questions. This was a reporter from Kitchener-Waterloo, I think the Record, asking about the fact that the University of Waterloo has severed ties with Huawei and does not want any more research grants or money coming from Huawei. And this was, we're talking millions and millions of dollars here. And of course, as the reporter noted, this could be precedent setting for other Ontario universities. Let's just get the heck away from dealing with the Chinese Communist Party and Huawei, which seems to be almost a direct arm of the Chinese Communist government. Premier Ford was asked if he supported the university's decision and if he thought if it concerned him that it would expand. And what he said was he didn't want to meddle in the university decision. It was up to them. But then he said, I do support it. And quite frankly, some of the deals we have with this Chinese Communist government, he described it, concerns me. I was quite surprised to hear a political leader in this country speak so clearly and frankly that just to say, dealing with this Chinese government, it concerns me, these deals with Huawei and the Chinese. To watch the federal Liberals dance around this current scandal, and there's no other word for it. I mean,
it's a disaster.
Disastrous, this diplomat threatening families of MPs. What the heck is going on? And to contrast that with Premier Doug Ford just saying, this concerns me. And an issue he did not have to comment on. He said right off the bat, this is their decision, but you know what? I support it. And what's going on here concerns me. That, I think, says more than we've seen any other political leader in this country say in quite a while on this particular file. It's not a huge factor in Ontario at this point, I guess, but to have him speak up so clearly and so plainly on that, full marks, kudos. That's exactly what needed to be said.
I talked to Lisa Raitt on Wednesday on Now and Next, and if you haven't had a chance, flip over and listen to what she's got to say about this, because we got into the whole conversation as it focused on Michael Chong. He's the MP, the Conservative MP, who was targeted by Chinese agencies. And here's the real worry and the remarkable part of this story. And I don't say remarkable as in awesome. I mean remarkable as in underline, italics, bolded. Is the only reason he found out there was a problem is because the Globe and Mail had done investigative reporting, came up with another freaking leaked document that said he had been targeted, that CSIS knew about it, and Lisa Raitt saying, okay, that memo landed on somebody's desk at the cabinet, and if it didn't land on the cabinet's desk, it landed on the Prime Minister's desk at some point. They had to have known about this and ignored it or thought that there wasn't a problem. Well, clearly, based on what the Globe is reporting, there's a problem. And the diplomat who was involved is still in Canada.
Yeah, why hasn't he been expelled? You can do it for no reason at all. You have that right. And clearly, you have some very valid reason. The Foreign Affairs Minister dancing, Minister Joly dancing around, the repercussions. We have to consider all the impacts of, expelling this one diplomat. Well, no, just take some action. You've got some pretty amazing intelligence here that this guy was targeted as a member of, and his family. And the government is trying to say, well, we didn't, as he said himself, CSIS doesn't produce reports just for CSIS. They're meant to go to a politician's desk for action. And that's exactly what happened here, except for the action part. And the action still hasn't happened. So again, the looks of this on the federal Liberals is just, quite frankly, stunning. They looked beyond inept And they're looking like, for some reason, they're stalling. They're not taking action that needs to be taken right in the simplest of actions.
Well, 2 hours before we got on here this morning, the breaking news was that the Chinese are wagging a finger warning Canada, you better not throw our guy out because there'll be serious repercussions. So it begs the question that based on the committee meeting that went on yesterday, and that's where a lot of this came out, and the banter back and forth, and Chong, I thought, was very strong on his presentation to the committee to say, we can't do this and we can't do that. And then almost within hours, you get Beijing responding almost to word for word what Chong was saying in that committee meeting. What kind of backroom conversations are going on in terms of the diplomatic channels between Canada and China? I mean, there has to be some kind of conversation going on here that makes Ottawa that worried about upsetting China.
Yeah, there's clearly something, and clearly the Chinese government, Chinese Communist government, has operatives right in that committee room. They don't even have to be watching it on TV. They're there. Nope. They're lobbying on the scene at the time. So why this government is being so cautious, if we're being generous, we're going to call them cautious, or spineless if you're less generous. But right now, something clearly needs to be done. And to have this, as you say, finger wagging coming out of Beijing before any action has even been taken, when it's only being demanded by the person who was targeted by this. Mm-hmm. And again, where's the government been? This document is not brand new. Been around, was it July 2021 or 2022? I forget. Anyway, it's certainly been around long enough for the government to have taken action, to have notified the MP and his family. Entirely.
So the other part of the story that kind of popped up this week, Kevin Vuong, who was a Liberal candidate in 2021 here in Toronto, 4 days before the election, it's revealed that he had been charged with sexual assault, makes all the headlines. The Liberals say we didn't know anything about this. They kick him out of the party, so he can't run as a Liberal. He's run as an independent. He wins the election. His political career pretty much in the toilet as a result of all of this. That's the short story. It's important to notice that the Crown withdrew the charges. They weren't dismissed by a court. They were withdrawn because there was no there there. Okay, and I know we can get into the debate about how often that happens with sexual assault cases, and I'm not trying to diminish that at all. I'm just stating this is what happened, and that this is the order of it. He tells us that CSIS has contacted Vuong, telling him that he was targeted by Chinese agencies.
So this coming out 4 days before his election chances could have been done by Chinese operatives, or that's his allegation.
Well, he has to be very careful because he's talked to CSIS about this, and you can't be revealing the specifics of the conversation. But I'm gonna talk to him in about half an hour, and I want to get the chronology down here to see when did they talk to him first. Sounds like it was fairly recent, but when did they become aware that was a problem, and did they make any reference to this particular scandal as being connected to him being targeted? And I heard all of the commentary on local talk radio. Well, this is never going to rehabilitate his political career. That's not the fucking point. No. The point is that somebody in China was doing this. Happened 2 years before the election.
Yeah,
they were so close to it that they knew that Kevin was a likely candidate. So close to it that they could set this thing up 2 years in advance of an election. And I talked to Christian Luprecht. I don't know if you ever had a chance to talk to him. He's a professor at Royal Military College and brilliant guy. And he's been all over the media on Ukraine and so on. But we were talking to him about China. And he said, they just play the long game. These guys don't worry about election mandates and cycles. They can take as long as they want. And it's a slow drip that eventually turns into a fire hose blast.
Yeah.
And so to me, it's not about Kevin Vuong's political career. That's done as far as that's concerned. But here's what they've managed to do. And I keep hearing people say, well, they aren't really affecting any policy in Ottawa. And they're, really? And they're not really affecting much in terms of outcomes because Kevin still won. You threw a shitstorm right into the middle of that local campaign and you completely caused chaos and disrupted the democratic process as a result of it.
Well, clearly what's going on here, they're not just crapping and trying to take down some candidates, they're favoring and enabling others with, financial and other types of support in the community. So this is very much beyond just interfering in our election. This is direct manipulation of candidates, policies. That's how you get the policy you want. You get the candidate that supports the policy you want. Or if you don't want to have one, you find one. You create one if you have to. But you get those policies you want, and you enable one candidate by promoting and making everything positive in the community. And apparently, if it's the Communist Party doing this, you do it with some threats as well. Yeah. Threats to families back home, threats to families in Canada. The level of politics that we just don't play politics at. As you say, they play it at the long game. They're not worried about election cycles, municipally, provincially, federally, municipal governments. It's all for them. It's just so they just constantly have it churning. They're constantly in operation. And we've heard so much in the last couple of years. And again, thanks to the work of journalists and reporters digging this out, Chinese police stations, operating in Canada.
Mm-hmm.
And have we heard any of them close? Apparently, this is still going on. Families, the diaspora community knows full well who these people are, and they're threatened by them on a regular basis. This is so far beyond just election interference. As I say, it's outright manipulation. And to your point about the long game, this is grooming and selecting specific candidates for specific policies at all levels, municipal, provincial, federal. They're pros at this. And Canada really, I know we don't want to get into a tit for tat war with China or even, any kind of economic trade war, obviously, but we can't be just run over. They have over 100 diplomats in Canada. That seems a high number with diplomatic immunity. Maybe we could scale that back without offending someone. No.
Well,
apparently not.
They've set the table now. I mean, it doesn't matter whether you go forward or you go backward. There's just as much risk, right? I mean, doing nothing is not an option.
But Canadian governments have danced around China so much. I remember this one time when Kathleen Wynne was premier, and she was going to be meeting the next day with one of the Chinese provincial premiers, leaders. And they announced this. So she had a news conference. She was talking about this. She said, of course, the meeting will be closed to the media. And I asked her, I said, well, why would that be? I said, in China, we accept they get to set the rules. She said, well, the Chinese don't like that. They prefer the media. I said, and do they get to set the rules here? Or do you get to demonstrate that you have an open media and we can cover these things? Well, they announced we could go in at least for the first 15 minutes, which was, we were allowed to go in and basically do a photo shoot at the beginning of the meeting. We didn't get to stay.
Which is meaningless. Except for nice pictures.
But it allowed them to say that at least we did this. And my question to Wynne, which really put her on her hind foot, was, are we that much in debt to China that they get to dictate the rules for how the media are treated in our country?
Yeah.
And that's it. Is this
the answer was clearly yes.
The answer, and so that. I told that anecdote for the reason, is that why Jolie is so shy? Is that why the Trudeau government hasn't? Is it really, do we owe them that much? Are we that much in their debt? If they called it we're doomed, so that they get to dictate how we operate. Even in this, they've just been caught red-handed. Well, what we consider red-handed. CSIS has reported this as red-handed as we're going to get, I would think.
Mm-hmm.
And there's still no action from the government. It's shameful, and it strikes me that, again, it's because they have so much, China has so much leverage over Canada, we're literally powerless here to do anything.
Well, given the way things are going with the Liberal convention this week, it doesn't sound as though there's going to be any sort of change in attitude as far as the Liberals are concerned, if in fact they get reelected, because Mr. Trudeau says, I'm in there with you, I'm looking forward to running in the next election. Does that surprise you?
Well, I wonder how many people in the room went, yay, he's going to go for a fourth time that we've never, ever done. It's like, yay, really? No. This, clearly, I think a lot of Liberals as well would have hoped that someone was being groomed to be taken, to be the next leader.
But that hasn't really happened.
It has not happened.
Right?
They have kept their lot in behind Justin Trudeau. Yep. Going for a fourth election when the man, and clearly, I don't care what you think, is just nowhere near as popular as he was last time. It's at the point where people are going, okay, Poilievre, I don't care, I don't like him. It's not Trudeau. It's literally at that point.
Yeah.
And if the Liberals don't know that, and I think a great many of them do know that, you're now dealing with an ego that won't stop. He's going to be the guy that I win 4 elections because he thinks he can take down Poilievre, because Poilievre to him is abhorrent. Well, so what? He's not to the majority of Canadians. You are. And that's what needs to be realized. You have lasted too long in this position. If the Liberals hope to form another government, they need another leader. And he made it very clear on Thursday night. He's staying. He's going to lead you for the 4th term. So, as I say, I'm curious how enforced those yays really were.
Well, it's not quite the same length of mandate, but it was the same level of disapproval for a Liberal leader that landed us with Bob Rae here in Ontario, right? I mean, it was the same. Are you kidding me? Because the arrogance of David Peterson, I think, was what is the parallel here, right?
Absolutely. That's how we got Bob Rae and the NDP as a government, because David Peterson just went, well, I get the majority. I'm going before that recession. I'm going early. And no, you arrogant bastard, you're not. You're
Even
done.
though we had 50% in the polls, he was way ahead.
But he also had another full year to govern, and Ontarians knew it.
Exactly, yeah.
Don't just try and ride us on that. You had the majority. We gave you the majority in the second time. What are you doing? And so being too smart by half, Ontario voters are smarter by half, and they don't like that kind of crap. So yeah, it's a very good parallel. Absolutely.
Bonnie Crombie is in the work in the hallways. Apparently, we're told at the Federal Liberal Convention, and that's not surprising considering she was a federal Liberal, and so that's part of her political roots in this country. But a lot of noise being made now about her assessing her run for the Liberal leadership here in Ontario.
Well, her handlers are actually admitting it, right? They're saying she's there. This is a testing the waters type situation. And very natural. And as you say, she's naturally at home in this group, the federal Liberals. She feels very comfortable there. And it's a good place to suss out what kind of support she has for an Ontario Liberal leadership run, or filling that run for mayor of Toronto. Sorry, no, that's just. But Crombie.
She's got till next week.
But Bonnie Crombie, I think, at this point, could absolutely walk in as the front runner.
Oh, entirely.
For any provincial Liberal leadership campaign. So she absolutely has to give it some serious weight and consideration. So I guess that means what we could do, could end up with, is after the Toronto mayoral election, is have one in Mississauga, if Bonnie Crombie ends up becoming the Ontario Liberal leader. I'm not sure whether she has to resign as mayor to run for the Liberal leader.
Well, municipal politics says you don't have to do that, right? I mean, that's why Josh Matlow and Brad Bradford are all still sitting in their city council seats and running for mayor. I mean, that's just bullshit, but we've already beaten that horse to death. Right?
Is there any of the Greenbelt that's in Toronto? Because I saw Josh Matlow out doing a Greenbelt policy. He's going to get all the mayors and Reeves together on the Greenbelt. Is there any of the Greenbelt actually in Toronto?
I don't think so. There's not much Greenbelt south of Steeles. Right?
Pretty much.
Unless you're counting like Downsview Park, and I don't think that qualifies.
No.
So, but yeah, God love him. We'll wait to see how that plays out.
Well,
by the way,
he's showing he's going to stand up to Doug Ford, which is at least interesting, because Doug Ford needs to be stood up to by some of these mayoral candidates, certainly on the Ontario Place redevelopment.
Yeah. Well, on the whole structure, the financial future, all the economics of running this particular city versus others. So, I agree with you. I think that's got to be the number one issue for whoever is mayor. And it's funny, we got into this discussion on Moore in the Morning today on News Talk 1010 on the roundtable about the latest polls. And there was one that came out from the folks at Viewpoints, and they have Olivia Chow in at 21.1% of the raw vote. And the next best there would be Saunders at 12.2. The biggest number is the not sure at 34%. and so John was, this is good. It's about the name recognition is clearly making a difference and so on. I think it was a Main Street poll out, sort of similar in terms of Chow leading the pack, and then it shifts variously after that. And I said, I talked to David Coletto at Abacus about 2 weeks ago, and I said, what's the value of these horse race polls? He says, there's no value in them at all. First of all, you've got 67 people on the ballot. So in order to do these polls, and John Wright, I heard him talking about the same thing. He says, we've got to put names in front of people. Well, we couldn't put a list of 67 names in front of you on a phone survey. So it's a meaningless thing in terms of the science behind it and the methodology, for one thing. And the other thing is that just splitting that the number of people that are responding to the poll involved in the survey, it doesn't really make any.
You couldn't get a sample size that made anything.
Exactly.
You couldn't get a large enough sample size to make any meaningful, especially with 67 candidates citywide.
So I said to John, the only value, and you see this, by the way, the viewpoints research people, this poll was done for the Broadband Institute. Just saying, okay?
So they like Olivia Chow, maybe?
Guess whose social media feed this one's just exploding in, right?
Well,
it's all the NDP operatives and everything else. And I don't blame them for it. This is a way of getting their candidate earned media because lazy media is saying, holy shit, she's leading in the polls. Look at that.
Well, and again, even the Main Street poll has Olivia Chow at 31%. The interesting thing there is they have Ballo and Matlow ahead of Saunders falling away. So again, if there were any actual numerical value in these, that'd be interesting. But it's not. It's just literally, have you heard this person's name? Yeah, it's pretty much, that's what we're talking about here. The fact that Saunders was police chief and doesn't have a slightly higher name recognition, I think maybe a bit concerning for his campaign. But that's perhaps the most you could read into something like this. It's all about, as you say, earned media, getting free media, saying, Olivia Chow walked in, she's leading all the polls. Well, yeah, she's got the biggest name recognition. But does people ask her, do you think she's going to be the best mayor? I wonder if you get the same leading response.
Right. Yeah, and even in the way these numbers are presented, it doesn't tell me whether or not they talk to decided voters or they've talked to committed voters. That is to say, I'm committing to actually going to the polls and casting a ballot. So there's some variations and nuance in there that makes that number, to your point, even less reliable in the long term. But when the 12th comes and they actually close the ability to put a name on a ballot, that's when you're going to start to see what has been going on internally. Are the organizations for Matlow and Bradford and Chow and all these folks who are kind of at the top of the list, are they seeing any movement, opportunity, benefit? And I would suggest that, in the first week or so, you're going to start to see people move. They're going to either get off the ballot or they're going to go and support somebody else because they know already by the time we get to the 12th, kind of where they are in the pecking order. Have they got the money to actually get out there and get people out to the polls? Have they got the money to actually put media out there in terms of ads and so on? Anthony Prudz he's got ads all over the place on the radio, online.
Is it just a matter of you've got a particular issue you really want to get front and center, and you go to one of the leading candidates and say, hey, I'll pull out today and throw you. If you say at least he's throwing this to me because he knows I'm going to look after this issue.
Right.
Boom. So hopefully that gets weeded down to a reasonable, 3 dozen. But I don't think so.
Well, but even among that top 10, if you that should be down to 4.
Absolutely. But it's not, I don't think it's good. It may be, who knows? I mean, it's hard to tell at this point, but this massive number now, I don't think is helping any of the campaigns other than they're literally just scratching for some attention at this point. Yeah.
And what worries me is that we're just going to cruise through here, sleepwalk right through until Election Day and wake up on the 27th of June and say, what the hell did we do? Right.
Well, we need to have someone with a higher name recognition than Olivia Chow come into the race center, or else she's going to walk away with it. And that I don't think is what most people would consider to be their best choice for mayor.
Yeah. And I admire Olivia Chow, followed her work for years and years, as have you. But not sure that right now, 2023, considering where we are, I don't think this is the window where we need to open it for Olivia Chow in the mayor's chair. So the other conversation, and based on the some of the reporting that our friend Sabrina and Angie at Queen's Park Observer has done, apparently the idea of amalgamation in Peel has surfaced to the top again in terms of how we're going to manage that, whether or not Mississauga is going to be standalone. And I wonder, against the backdrop of Crombie considering a run for the Liberal leadership. Well, but where's she a stronger voice for Mississauga, right?
That could be her campaign. Yeah, it's absolutely. That's fascinating to think where that's going to go. But funnily enough, those audits that are now coming, the province is going to open up bidding for auditing companies to have audits of municipalities. They happen to be, where are we doing this here now? Toronto, Mississauga, Brampton, and Peel. How funny. I wonder why they're audited. So actually, if these actually are independent outside audits, which they're going to do, the province is putting them out for bidding, the province may then not get back the answers it wants.
I don't know about that.
You think just because they contract...
Paint me skeptical.
Basically, the municipalities say they're out $5 billion because the province has canceled their development fees that they charge developers.
Exactly.
$5 billion in a year. So they want the province to, the province says, no, you've got enough in your contingencies and your reserve funds to more than offset these development fees. So this is where the fight's going to be. I'm skeptical that the government's going to get the audit report that it wants, but somehow Dave seems to think that maybe the government gets the audit it wants.
There's an over and under here for sure. Keith, good of you to join us, and enjoy your weekend. It's always good to talk to you.
Thank you, sir. You too.
This is SSN.
Story Studio Network.